Now for what you're all here for. Tonight we're joined by 6 candidates for mayor. Let us welcome to the stage incumbent Mayor Luke Bronin, publisher and educator Dr. Aaron Lewis, local television entrepreneur Stan McCauley, community organizer and state representative Brandon McGee, former Mayor Eddie Perez, and former chairman of the Hartford Board of Education, Craig Stallings. So if you live in Connecticut, you're sure to recognize our host and moderator for the evening. When it comes to local politics, especially those of Hartford, we couldn't ask for better journalists. Wika is thrilled to introduce Dennis House, Channel 3 evening news anchor, host of Face the State with Dennis House, and most importantly, fellow West End neighbor.
Kurt, thank you very much, and thank you to all the folks for being here tonight and to the candidates for participating in this mayoral debate. The rules are fairly simple. We're going to open with a 2-minute opening statement. Then the questions will each be asked of the candidates. They'll each have 1 minute to answer the question, and then the person who's asked the question first will then get a minute to rebut. It's pretty simple how we did it here. Alphabetical order, Bronin down to Stallings, that's how they're seated, and that's how we'll begin our opening statements as well. So we will first begin with Mr. Bronin. You have 2 minutes.
First of all, thank you so much, Kurt, and the West End Civic Association. Thank you, Dennis, for moderating. And
one quick second, if I could. So we're using a clock system here, and it's been a little bit persnickety. I think we're okay. So, and we're going to restart it. Suzanne's doing it. What's going to happen is you will see it. It will go from green when you begin, and you can speak. Hopefully, it'll go to yellow at the last 15 seconds, and red means stop. So, now, Mr. Bronin. Sorry about that.
I'll still say the thank yous on the clock. Thank you so much, Kurt and Wika. Thanks, Dennis. And it's great to see a room packed on a Tuesday night for this forum. So thank you, everybody, for coming out. Over the last 3.5 years, we have worked hard to move our city from one of the deepest fiscal crises our city's ever faced to what is, in truth, a fragile stability. And to do it honestly, to build partnerships that hadn't been built in a while. To work with our unions, to work with our biggest companies and get them re-engaged, to make sure that the rest of the state and the region understand why we need a strong and vibrant capital city, and to get ourselves on a path where, for the first time in a long time, we can look out over the years ahead and say, here's how we're going to balance our budgets and get to where we need to go. But at the same time as we battled that crisis, tried hard to plant the seeds that were going to sprout in the years ahead, and I think you can start to see some of them coming up. Whether it's in the downtown development and residential growth that you see, or whether it's in the neighborhoods in Upper Albany, where Weaver High School is opening this fall, and Martin Luther King School is about to be renovated. Bowles Park, Westbrook Village, the Albany Avenue streetscape, down in Parkville with a tremendous amount of growth, and down in Coltsville, as well as investments in our parks. We have so much more work to do, but we've fought honestly through one of our biggest challenges. We did not let ourselves be defined by crisis, but set big goals for where we want our city to be. And at the same time, we worked hard to tackle issues like, how do we create more opportunities for our young people through things like the Youth Service Corps? How do we create more opportunities for those who are re-entering our community, like the Reentry Welcome Center? How can we better partner with our superintendent to tackle issues like chronic absenteeism? And how can we set out a path that's going to get Hartford to be a place where jobs are growing again? I hope to get the chance to keep doing that work.
Thank you, Mr. Bronin. Next, Mr. Lewis, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, I'm Aaron Lewis, and I'm a native of Hartford, Connecticut. I've been here for the most part all my life, with a short stint in East Hartford, but came back to the city perhaps about 6-7 years ago. Hartford's my home. It's where I went to elementary school, Rawson School, went to Fox Middle. I lost basketball games all the time in Caney Park. I'd go over to the other side of the city, Goodwin Park, and swim. This is home to me. I know it. I started an institute called the Scribes Institute about 9 years ago for 2nd to 8th graders, and the concentration is literacy as well as STEAM. And also foreign languages. And so it's a supplemental program to help assist with the actual educational system to help children be ready for the marketplace when they graduate from high school. Education is a passion of mine, and the children are a major concern of mine, and I believe wholeheartedly that our economy is going to thrive once we start to reinvest in our children. I think that the typical model that is being demonstrated is really a wrong model, where we're investing from the top but not from the children on the way up. And if we start reinvesting in our children, we'll see all of the areas that all of us feel are very, very dear to us, like safety, will improve. Of course, the economy will improve. The environment will improve. People will want to come and live in Hartford. So I have a tremendous emphasis on your children and making sure that I fight to make sure that Hartford school system is the best school system on earth. Right now, we're probably more challenged in our Hartford public schools than any other city in this entire region. And that's something that I want to see change. For the past 30 years, I've also been a professional publisher and ghostwriter, having written many, many books for several clients all around the world. And but most important, again, is what I said, is safety in this community, as well as educating our kids so that our children are no longer going to prison, but instead they're going to the White House.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. McCauley, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. I am here to persuade you, hopefully, to think about a change in direction. I am running to be a constituent representative. For the last 37 years, I have listened to the heartbeat of the city. Wants, dreams, aspirations, desires, sadness. I have been at meetings where I have heard people cry, walk out because they've been in the meeting for 30 years hearing the same thing over and over again. And what I have found by listening to Hartford is that the solution for Hartford is right here in this room. Unfortunately, your representatives don't necessarily represent you. It's like you're this little package they have on the shelf until election time comes around, and they pull you out, and they ring your little bell, and you, like Pavlovian dogs, walk down to the voting booth, and you vote, and then they don't need to hear from you again. Go away. Let us do what we do. But they don't represent you. It's your government. It's not the party's government. It's not my government. It's your government. And it works when you work it. So you need a representative who's going to listen to your dreams, wants, and desires. All right? You have a vision for the city. The government is supposed to help you get that vision together and install it and make it work for your community. And so over the next couple of minutes, hopefully, we'll be able to answer the questions that will help you free your political mind.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Mr. McGee, you have 2 minutes. And I would ask that you please hold applause until the end of the debate, please.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Just making sure everybody's there. I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you to the organizers of this great town hall debate. My name is Brandon McGee, born and raised in Hartford's North End. Went away to college, started off as a volunteer when I returned home, worked tremendously in my community through the Neighborhood Revitalization Zone as the Economic Development Chairperson, and quickly realized that many of our neighbors and residents in this city needed another champion at the state level, because many of the issues that we're faced with definitely had to do with policy-driven changes that will impact systemic barriers that we all face in this particular community. As state representative, I've championed many pieces of legislation from restoring funds back to Medicaid recipients, to providing supports to those formerly incarcerated, but most importantly, providing leadership for the great state of Connecticut. and also serving alongside the Hartford delegation, Matthew Ritter and others, to secure funding to be sure that the city of Hartford did not file for bankruptcy. And now, why am I asking to be your mayor? Now is the time for us to really be extremely intentional about what we're doing and how we're doing it, and making sure that throughout this entire city, we are providing opportunities for every neighborhood to enjoy all of the growth that's happening, not only just downtown, but in this entire city. So I'm so delighted to be here, and I really hope that this conversation will yield much success.
Thank you, Mr. McGee. Mr. Perez, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm very, very happy to be here in the West End, where one time I was your neighbor in the West End. Now I'm in the behind the Rocks neighborhood. As mayor of this city, I ran a responsible and responsive government administration that invested in schools, public safety, and home ownership. We had a uniform approach to all Hartford's neighborhoods, an approach where residents in each and every neighborhood came first. At the same time, I balanced budgets, kept the debt low, and our bond rating high. I was able to accomplish this without a state bailout while fighting cuts from 2 Republican governors that put tax cuts for the wealthy before the health of urban neighborhoods in our state. I kept our city moving forward through a tough economic decade that included 9/11, the housing and banking crisis, and the world recession. I made the city's largest historic investment in both physical and educational infrastructure of our public schools. I worked with many neighborhoods, including the West End, to change our charter. And I also brought accountability in the areas of student achievement, workforce development, and college residence to the Board of Education. I was responsible for the transition of our schools back from state control. On the city side, my administration picked up the garbage, paved our streets, managed crime, and ran a Class A fire department. Morale in local government was high, and the residents of our city and region were proud of New England's rising star.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Mr. Stallings, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Craig Stallings. I'm former chairman of the Board of Education, lifelong resident of the city of Hartford. And I just have to admit, as a North End kid, this is the absolute first time I've ever stepped foot in this room. And as I look on the walls, I see a rich history of Hartford, and we need to cultivate a rich history again. As chairman of the board, along with the superintendent, we did a district model of excellence where we closed 10 schools to mitigate $15 million to reinvest in Hartford's education. Hartford is changing, and we need leadership that's going to be equitable, that's going to represent downtown as much as it's going to represent the neighborhoods. We need quality programming for our youth, and we need a stable local economy. But more importantly, we need to restructure, reorganize City Hall. We have not done that in years. So if the board restructured and reorganized the school system, we need to restructure and reorganize City Hall and city departments. So we can find better efficiency, so we can provide better service. We need to restructure the police department. I'm a true believer that the police needs a commissioner to oversee the chief. The rank and file need dedicated leadership that's going to look out for rank and file. And what we need to do is work together to change Hartford. We can be an integrated city. We can be an international city if we work together. And the only way we're going to achieve that is together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, these questions that you're about to be asked came from the audience here and many people across the city of Hartford. They tend to be West End centric, which is totally okay because this is sponsored by the West End Civic Association. The first question will go to Mr. Lewis. And why do you want to be mayor of Hartford? Be specific as possible. And why do you think we need a new mayor? Because obviously you're running on that premise.
Well, one of the things that I will emphasize to no end. I mean,
And you have 1 minute, by the way.
I sound redundant like a broken record, that everything starts with education. I was a product of the school system in Hartford. I went to Rawson School. All of my teachers, and that's a big deal for a first and second grader to say this, all of my teachers are awesome, every single one. We had at that time a school system that represented the community. There were Jewish people that were teaching us. There were Irish people teaching us. There were Black Americans, many from Tuskegee and from Fisk University. They represented the crust of our school. We all went on to do great things. At that time, we weren't going to prison at all because we were properly educated. So I really believe that when we re-emphasize the great import of education, that we're going to change the entire society. And the reason why I'm running for mayor is because I believe that that emphasis has been lost in our city, and I am endeavoring to bring it back at any cost.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. McCauley, you have 1 minute. Why do you want to be mayor, and why do you think we need a new one?
I think we need a new mayor because I don't believe that the current mayor represents the majority of the people in the city in terms of what they want, envision, and as it relates to our neighborhoods. And I'm one of those people that if you're going to talk about what the change needs to be, then be about that change. Come up with some ideas, listen to people, and then present them. I think that I have listened for 37 years to what Hartford wants. I didn't run last time because I thought with an individual who had the educational acumen of our current mayor, that we would get better. And I'm disappointed, so rather than to complain about it, I present myself as an alternative.
Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I've been talking for quite some time about the importance of economic development. While we know that education is extremely important in our city, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of supporting our small businesses, mom and pop shops, in neighborhoods that most oftentimes have been overlooked and underrepresented. I know firsthand a particular area in our town, or in our city rather, being overlooked, and money literally sitting on the books that could be used to help to support small businesses, put people back to work, address some of the poverty that's directly connected to crime in our neighborhoods. And so why I'd like to run, I'd like to be a bit more intentional about supporting our neighborhoods, supporting our downtown, and making sure that we're working alongside every single resident in this city and leverage all of our great assets.
Mr. Perez, you have 1 minute.
Our current mayor has turned his back on our school system. Our school system is probably the most, if not the only, way for us to be able to get out of our current crisis. Our school system needs the attention of the mayor, not from a distance and not from afar. I am committed to making sure that we put the school system back where it was a decade ago, where people were proud of at least the plan we had and their participation in that plan. I also think it's important to make sure that each and every neighborhood feels part of the economic revival of our city. Many neighborhoods, many of my neighbors, feel left behind.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Mr. Stallings, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Part of the reason why I'm running is as former chairman of the Board of Education and former chairman of the Finance Committee, I oversaw a $415 million budget. And as you know, the city has been in a financial crisis. And as chairman, I did not find out about the bailout plan until after it was solidified. The board was not instructed. The board was not involved in that process. And so I'm running because we need shared governance. The way that our city charter is structured, it's not structured for shared governance. It's not structured for checks and balances. And what I would like to do is implement checks and balances so that we can have a process that's open and transparent, that a city that works together efficiently, and a city that is going to take care of its young and its residents. Excuse me.
Thank you. Mr. Bronin, why do you want another term as mayor?
Because we got a lot of work left to do, and I love doing the work, and I hope to get the chance to keep moving the city forward. Look, when I ran for mayor 4 years ago, it was because I was really frustrated with some of the decisions that were being made. I thought that there were some big mistakes that were putting a lot of things at risk. And when I took office, I realized quickly I didn't even really understand the depth of the challenge we faced or how immediate it was. So we had to very quickly go into the mode of raising our hands and saying, we can't fix this alone. We have to be honest about the deep challenges. We have to address them now, and then we have to move forward. And whether it was dealing with the debacle of the baseball park or the budget crisis, so much time was spent on that I hadn't gotten the chance to do the work that I really want to do, which we're now finally starting to do, of growing this city for everybody. And I hope to get the chance to keep doing that work.
Thank you, Mr. Bronin. Mr. Lewis, you have 1 minute to rebut if you'd like. You don't have to, but if you'd like to, you can.
I'm going to talk about education anyways. There's no need for me to rebut. I'm still there because, like I said, and some of my colleagues have said the same thing, that the educational system's in crisis, and so the economy's not going to change. I remember Chief Favela, when he was speaking about our program at the Scribes Institute, he shot out a statistic that sounded kind of strange. He says that upwards of 90% of the people that he arrests are functionally illiterate. And so he says that if you keep educating the children, that we won't arrest as many people. And so that correlation really was dear to my heart, to change the educational system, and then we'll see an entire society where everyone wants to live here because it's a safe society and it's a thriving society. I think everything is interconnected.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Our next question. West Hartford Center is about a mile from the city line at Farmington and Prospect, yet people will tell you they feel a big difference when you drive Farmington into the West End. The streetscapes aren't as nice. Some restaurants have been closed for 10 years, vacant lots, vacant buildings. So, I want a big picture here. What is your specific vision for Farmington Avenue from Prospect to downtown? And this goes to Mr. McCauley first. 1 minute.
From Farmington Avenue to downtown.
From Prospect and Farmington to downtown. What is your vision, your big picture to revitalize that area?
You know, I was talking to Steve Fournier, actually, who is a West End resident. And, you know, I have found, once again, that the answers to all of the questions actually are right here in Hartford. And he said, and I thought this was brilliant, he would like to put a trolley that would come up and down Farmington Avenue, and it would be free. And because people could use that trolley system, it would encourage people to then shop. They could get on, they could get off, it would revitalize, it would give people opportunities to really get into the
Thank you, Mr. McCauley.
The community.
Mr. McGee, specifically, what would you do for that stretch of Farmington Avenue?
Sure. I think the West End, actually I believe the West End is surrounded by so many beautiful infrastructures and just places to walk. So I envision working alongside, number one, the West End NRZ and others and business owners to really figure out how do we take advantage of the existing infrastructure that's there. There are so many assets on Farmington Avenue and Prospect. We need to look at anchoring larger businesses and leveraging all of the clientele that they might have. We're home to Mark Twain, we're home to Harriet Beecher Stowe, all these beautiful historic buildings and history. How can we build on that? And that would be one of the things that I would do, but I would work closely with them on being a champion for this particular neighborhood.
Mr. Perez, you have 1 minute.
Since I take a lot of criticism for working on Park Street, I might actually use that to my advantage. The way that Farmington Avenue has to be organized is to empower the owners, the residents of Farmington Avenue by organizing a special service district, just like we have downtown, just like we had on Park Street. But if we organize it on Farmington Avenue, you have to do it on Blue Hills, you have to do it on Barber Street, you have to work citywide with that.
Please hold
plan.
off your applause, please. Mr. Stallings.
Thank you. What I would do on Farmington Ave first is work with the NRZ and local organizations, but really look at revitalizing Farmington Avenue and supporting small business that is going to highlight the character of the neighborhood and the community. Implement businesses that are going to support seniors, give seniors things to do during the day to enjoy themselves and socialize. Have a citizen patrol to make sure that Farmington Avenue is safe after hours. But more importantly, make sure that we have small business that is local, that is committed to serving the residents, and really attach that West End hub to that North End, the West End line. So you can't tell the difference between West Hartford and Hartford, and then work my way to Asylum Hill, east and west.
Thank you, Mr. Stallings. Mr. Bronin, you have 1 minute.
So I'll tell you about what we are doing, and there are really two main things. The first is we are preparing to do the kind of streetscape work that we're doing right now on Albany Avenue on Farmington. You know, Matt Ritter worked very hard to secure funding to allow us to begin the planning process and then move forward with the construction of streetscape work on Farmington. But just as is true on Albany and elsewhere, a streetscape alone is not enough. And another key part of the work we're already doing is focusing on blight. Because while we've got some great, strong local business on Farmington Avenue, we also have a lot of blighted properties. And you know, whether it's the building that's right on the corner of Farmington and Sisson, which has now been reborn and remade, and I think looks pretty good, but that was across the street from the old Colonial Theater, where we've made efforts to get that into other hands. Either the city will take control of it, or into other hands that will bring that building back to life. You've got to concentrate your efforts on revitalization in core areas, and to me, it's those two things that start the work on Farmington.
Thank you, Mr.
Streetscape and combating blight.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Mr. Lewis, you have 1 minute.
I believe that we are sitting on an absolute gold mine in this city that takes a visionary to see. This city should be one of the greatest tourist areas in the Northeast, hands down. We're talking about history beyond imagination, from Prospect all the way to the Connecticut River. I mean, we have a river. You know what I'm saying? If you go to D.C., the Potomac River is the center of their economy, and we're not tapping into what we actually have. And so I believe that we need to develop a touristic center that includes definitely Farmington Avenue, but, you know, as even in my slogan, I'm here for all of Hartford. All over Hartford, there's amazing areas that needs to be developed, and we could use Farmington Avenue as the lead. But I really believe that we need to, bring people to the Mark Twain House, one of the greatest writers of all time, here at Beecher Stowe, and we need to capitalize on what's already there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to start spinning what we have.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. McCauley, you have 1 minute to rebut. And I know you mentioned Mr. Fournier's idea, but what else specifically would you do as mayor for that stretch of Farmington Avenue?
Well, with all that everybody's talking about, working with the NRZs, and I have a plan to work with the NRZ citywide, at the end of the day, for all of our main thoroughfares, if you're going to talk about economic development and bringing all of these businesses with the emergence of e-technology as it relates to retail, you've got to get a way and a means by which to attract people. Because without people there, you're not going to have anything but revitalized storefronts that will then be empty, and it'll be like Pratt Street was for years. Pretty, but no business, no retail. So what are you going to do to bring retail in? And you have to do something that's going to upstage Blueback, upstage Front Street to get people to come down there. And if you have a long conversation with Steve, the trolley's not a bad idea.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Our next question will begin with Mr. McGee, and it's related. We have a couple real estate questions tonight. The city recently foreclosed on the Colonial Theater, formerly Braza. What are your plans for that property, if elected, and what specifically would your timeline be for implementing change there? It's been vacant for quite some time.
Yeah, I actually remember when they served a lot of meat there, but I'm I'm a vegan, so it's cool. But one of the things that I would do, given appropriate funds, I would work alongside the West End NRZ, our development office, and others to figure out how best to utilize that piece of property, that land. So it's not the highest bidder. It's not giving it to my friends so that they can do what they want with it. The idea is, how can we build on what's here in this city and respond to the needs in this particular neighborhood? There's a huge homeless population. There are many individuals returning home from the criminal justice system. How can we create safe spaces and hubs and take advantage of the arts and the culturally diverse neighborhood right there on Farmington Avenue?
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Perez, you have 1 minute.
I would make sure that the economic development folks do an assessment and make sure that we start marketing that location and put the required incentives similar to what we do downtown. When we have a problem downtown, the chamber gets involved, local businesses get involved, and they solve the problem. We could do that in the West End. We could do that. This is one building. There are plenty of other buildings that have the same problem on Farmington Avenue.
Mr. Stallings.
Thank you. Thank you. Two different things. If we weren't able, let me back up. As a city leader, I would, again, look for and recruit attractive developer or business to develop the property. If not, then I would convert it to a senior center. The North End has a senior center, the South End has a senior center, but there is nowhere for West End residents to really congregate, to sit and talk, and to really talk about the issues and again, develop a community. What we need to do around the city of Hartford in general is develop community and celebrate it. So if we did not find a developer, and we haven't found a developer in years, I used to go to the Colonial Theater when they show kung fu movies and karate movies, so I love it. And again, it reminds me of community, and I think that's an asset that should remain in the community for the community.
Mr. Bronin, you have 1 minute.
I'll tell you what I'd like to see there. That doesn't mean that's what'll go there, but I'd like to see a restaurant there. You've got that corner where you have the Half Door, you've got Tizane. One of the reasons that West Hartford works is because it's got a concentration of restaurants in one place. People don't just want to go to a lonely outpost. They want to go where they can say, hey, let's drive down to the corner of Farmington Citizen and decide where we want to go. And I think that's what would be the best use there. We'll do our best to market it, to get a restaurant that helps enliven that corner, and we'll see what the options are. But I think it's important to say, we've been deliberate about doing that. We went through the process of a tax deed sale so that we could have a little bit more control of the ultimate outcome at that property rather than just selling tax liens like had been done in the past. And we've gone deliberately, methodically, step by step to put us in a position so that my office, working with the NRZ and others, can decide what do we want the future to there to be. But I'll be clear about what I want. I think a restaurant makes sense.
Mr. Lewis.
I'm a big advocate of the arts, and I really believe that an arts center would be a tremendous venue there. I also believe that it should not necessarily compete against those that we already have. I mean, we have, Real Artways, we have the Bushnell, we have the Hartford Stage Company. So something that was, really eclectic, really for young people to want to go to on the weekends, but some type of an arts and entertainment center is something that I think would be most apropos, because we need more things for young people to do so that they will stay in our wonderful city. And so I really believe if they had a tremendous arts based and entertainment center, that it would be well utilized at that particular venue. And I'm like my vegan brother, to stay away from too much meat.
Mr. McCauley, you have 1 minute.
Obviously working with the NRZs to see what they would like to be in there. I'm kind of biased when it comes to using space like that. I'd find something to do that would be in line with communications, and also, as my dear brother here says, the arts. Arts and communication, where people could learn how to create digital content that could be produced and aired. You could put a nice little production studio in there and make films and explore, the talent that our kids have. But, I mean, that's my vision for the place. I think that the community should demonstrate what it is that they want, and I'm sure they've expressed that already. I just don't know what it is.
Thank you. Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute to rebut if you'd like.
Sure. I remember, just to talk a little bit about the north end of Hartford, I conducted a survey alongside a consultant, and one of the things that we did was we wanted to talk to the residents first. And this project that's happening in North Hartford, it's called Reimagine, Revitalize, Reassert Main Street. And the idea is to create a very special hub in each and every section of our city so that everyone is thriving. The idea to just simply have an eatery or a restaurant in a particular area, we need places for folks to live, affordable places for folks to live, and not just a come in and leave out, but how do we capture all of what's happening right here in the great city of Hartford and even in our West End.
Thank you, Mr. McGee. One other real estate question, and then we'll get into some police questions. And then we'll begin with Mayor Perez on this one here. One of the city's prime pieces of real estate is across from the state capitol. It used to house the Statler Hilton Hotel, which was imploded in 1990. Next year will mark 30 years as a vacant pavement eyesore. As mayor, what should go there, and what will you do to get it done? You have 1 minute.
Well, again, you have to have a plan for that area, and the plan for that area should be developed in collaboration with the NRC. But the notion of having retail and housing in that area to complement the plan for the Bushnell is exactly what it should be. It should be an expansion of the existing plan.
Mr. Stallings, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. If I had a wish list, I would build a new city hall there. And if not, what I think we should build more restaurants and more businesses that is going to facilitate the staff and the workers that work at the Capitol, work at the state buildings, and that are going to serve the new Teachers Village building that is currently being developed behind it. Again, that parcel of land is prime, and it should be developed in a way that's going to generate revenue for the city of Hartford. And if not, again, I would put a new city hall there.
Mr. Bronin, you have 1 minute.
I'd love to see residential and mixed use. You know, I think the more people, I think it was Stan who said it, and he said it well, that what you need to attract people is people. And so the more that we can create density of residential living, the more vibrant our city will feel. And that's true in almost all of our neighborhoods. But in that spot in particular, right on, Bushnell Park, Eddie Perez is right. It complements the work that we're trying to do over by the Bushnell and the vacant lots there. If we can get that built up into residential, it creates a tremendous amount of energy and activity and feet on the street and, folks in the park. And that, I think, changes the way the city feels. Now, I could talk about this with respect to almost any part of our city, any neighborhood. The question specifically about that parcel, so I'll answer there. But that's what I think, I hope we see at some point if we can ever wrest it from its current owners.
Mr. Lewis, what would you do specifically for that plot?
There's an amazing mall right in the center of Hong Kong that I love to go. I can't afford to buy anything in it, but I just love to go. It makes me feel wealthy. And so just being there. It's more than 50 stories tall, and that would be a dream of mine to see right in downtown Hartford, a thriving epicenter with a mall and a myriad of different things for the children, skating rink, a playground on the inside, a movie theater, everything equipped for the family to come downtown Hartford with ample parking to be able to do everything that they need to do so that we can have people coming to Hartford and that they won't have to go out to Manchester and Glastonbury and West Hartford every single weekend when they need something to do. So I would definitely invest in a mall that's a state-of-the-art facility.
Mr. McCauley, you have 1 minute.
Okay, I have an answer, but I'm still not sure where this is at. Is this the old Hilton?
This is the plot of land right across from the state capitol. It's now a parking lot. It's been a parking lot for 30 years. Right across from the state
Right
capitol.
across from Black Eyed Sally's, right?
Yes.
Okay. Next to the Y. Okay, all right. I thought that's what, but I want to make sure before I give you my answer.
We can
because,
restart the clock
you don't reinvent the wheel. I'm good.
Okay, all right.
Okay. You don't reinvent the wheel. The answer is the answer. Mixed use, retail, and residential.
Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute.
Sorry, we were still over here talking about exactly where it was. But I too would take an assessment and work with city developers to figure out what best to do with that piece of land. And it's not to turn it into a parking lot, not to put upscale apartments, but figure out how can we bring that entire node together so that there are somewhere to eat, there's somewhere to, beyond just the Bushnell, but you can do some other things in that particular area. But it's a very unique area, and I think it's an opportunity for us to look nationally on what it is that we could be doing with some of these open spaces that we have here in Hartford.
Mr. Perez, you have 1 minute to rebut. What would you do with that property?
I already answered the question about what we would do with the property.
As mayor.
Again, the plan is really to complement the work from the beginning of Capitol Avenue to in front of the Capitol. And my plan would be to try to do something that had housing and residential areas on top. But the more important part is to make it street friendly by having some commercial and retail on the first floor.
Thank you. Mr. Stallings, our next question. What is the biggest problem facing Hartford? And if elected mayor, what would you do about it?
Wow. I can sit here all day talking about the big problems of Hartford. But I think the biggest problem at Hartford is we have no sense of self. There is no uniform identity about Hartford. It was the insurance capital of the world, and someone, I think Metro Hartford, coined the phrase, Hartford has it. But what we have never done as a city is really craft our own narrative. We have not gotten together as a city to really focus on a local economy that is working for all of us, that is going to put Hartford in a position of financial stability for real. We can't have a government that does not represent the people because its structure's outdated. We can't have fees on top of taxes. And so basically, we need to restructure Hartford, and we need to redefine Hartford.
Thank you, Mr. Stallings. Mr. Bronin, you have 1 minute.
I think there are three that are probably tied. One, we are a great city with beautiful diversity, and we are far too divided, and we let ourselves be divided against ourselves too much. Second, our educational system. We need to strengthen our educational system. And I think that the work that Craig Stallings has done, along with our superintendent, to set out a path that they can begin moving down is exactly the right work. And, I will say, respectfully to Mayor Perez, I don't know that 10 years ago, was the glory days for Hartford schools either. We, for a long time, neglected and abandoned neighborhood schools. We forgot entirely about building the capacity to deliver quality special education inside our schools. Those are key parts of the district model for excellence that the board and the superintendent are working toward. And if we're going to strengthen our city and convince families to stay and grow and live, then we have to work hard on that. I'm out of time, but
thank you, Mr. Bronin. Mr. Lewis.
I can respectfully say that I lived here when Mayor Perez was the mayor, and the schools were a far shot from where they are right now. They were much better, and I know because I lived here. I know because my friends had children that lived here, and it was better. And right now, I think that the greatest problem in our city right now, challenging us, is called denial. We are not honest about where we are. We say things, and the people hear, and they listen, and it becomes like Teflon Don, that anything that is thrown out, it just sticks. Our school system is in a horrible shape. And so to not know that, or to even try to compliment the superintendent, she's doing the worst job I've ever seen in my entire life. And so until you get honest about things, nothing's going to change. And so I think that when it comes to that, we are in a complete and total state of denial, and we need to wake up.
Mr. McCauley, you have 1 minute. Please hold your applause till the end, please. Mr. McCauley, you have 1 minute.
I think, we have a system. The system is just disjointed and dysfunctional. I think we need to reprioritize what we have, and what I've come up with is a 5-point plan. And all of these run concurrent. They're not one more important than the other, but our first priority has to be our kids. It has to be a citywide initiative, all hands on deck. You know, our children. The second thing would be communication. The third would be this working in silos, where everybody in the city is working in their own silo, acting like they're going to run off with my piece of cheese. The fourth thing would be, you know, public safety and quality of life, and then economic and community development. We need to reprioritize what's important in our city, and then work intentionally as one city on making the city function.
Thank you. Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I would start off with education. I would definitely serve on the Board of Education to ensure that some things are addressed as the mayor of the city and work alongside our superintendent. The other piece is addressing our housing stock. Hartford, we are home to some of the most beautiful homes in the nation. However, we're also home to a lot of slum landlords. And so as state representative, I put forth a piece of legislation that would close the loop for many of these LLCs that are being developed or created in our city and getting away literally with murder. And then lastly, I would definitely work alongside each and every one of our business men and women, our corporations, to figure out how can we create opportunities for individuals, firstly, that live in this city, and then secondly, how can we recruit some of the nation's most talented people? Obviously, crime and poverty will then be addressed by giving opportunities to individuals that live here.
Thank you, Mr. McGee. Mr. Perez, you have 1 minute.
For 50 years I've been doing this. Let me tell you, the problem in Hartford is money. Money. The state doesn't fund the pilot, the state doesn't fund ECS, and they blame the poor people of Hartford for that. The problem is money. We spend a lot of money downtown, and we forget the 50 neighborhoods. What we need to do in Hartford is start creating wealth in our neighborhood. We need to get wealth in our small businesses, and we need to make Hartford proud again.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Mr. Stallings, you have 1 minute to rebut.
Thank you so much. I'll say that we definitely need to have a strong economy and create a strong economy. Let me just say it this way. If you control the diameter of a person's life, then you control the circumference of their life. So if you control the diameter of their educational experiences, and 60% of our children are in failing schools because we have a chef case that the city has yet to adequately and equitably adjudicate. So we are in limbo. We're eating our young. Our children are not served. They are, to quote a rapper, they are raised by the stop sign, no religion. They've been saved by the Glock 9. That is a failure of leadership and support for our children. And so we have to stop eating our young. We have to create a strong economy. We need leadership that's going to represent our people instead of selling our people out. And we need to be committed.
Mr. Bronin, our next question. What kind of philosophy should the next police chief have, and what kind of direction should he or she take the police force in?
No, it's a great question. So I think that the most important part of the philosophy is recognizing that when we talk about community policing is not a subspecialty inside the police department. We've got outstanding officers. Joe Sherbo, who's a CSO here, I think is a great CSO. The community service officer model is a good one. But I think recognizing that community policing is the responsibility and the ethic of an entire department. And that means as we build up our numbers back to where they need to be, that our officers are getting out of their cars, that we're restoring walk beats, that we're focusing on those face-to-face interactions and building trust. We know that matters. We know it makes a difference. I think our police officers want that. I think they love when they can do that. We have had to do a lot of rebuilding and recruiting over 100 officers in the last few years. But I think we need a chief who understands that the core of effective policing is the relationship between resident and officer.
Mr. Lewis, you have 1 minute.
When I was raising my children, all of whom are adults now, I didn't give them any, games to play in terms of electronic games into the weekend because I felt that the basics was necessary, so they had to read actual physical books. And so that's how I raised all of them because I believe in the basics. And when I was a child at Rawson School, they would bring in Officer Friendly. And it was a cool dude that would come in and he was real happy and friendly and he showed us everything about what policing was. One of the things that's problematic in all societies is that the way that police are portrays, and this is actually a documented fact, 2% of the negativity, but don't always show that 98% of the positive that's being done. So there again, even in our school systems, if the police and the school systems will become integrated to educate the community on what their purposes really are and the good that they do, and they can actually have a real community bond, I think that it will turn things around within the entire police department.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. McCauley, what direction should the next chief take this force in?
Last Thursday, I produced a program with former Chief of Police Bernie Sullivan. And, it was very, very enlightening because, your police chief sets police policy, like the superintendent sets, is responsible for education policy. And our next police chief really has to be someone who is dedicated, understands, and is willing to move forward the ideas and the concepts of community policing. But the community has to understand the cost of community policing. Because if you're going to put police officers on the street, in cars, on bikes, on horseback, and all those things, he can't run to an A call when you need him. So you actually need more police officers for community policing, which is counterintuitive to people thinking we don't need more cops. But you actually do if they're going to take the time to be involved in the community. So what we really need to do is to have a police chief that's dedicated to educating us as to what it is his policies are as it pertains to community policing.
Thank you. Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute.
We actually need a police chief that's going to change the culture of our police department. We need a police chief that understands some of the most disheartening things that have happened to residents in this community, particularly young people of color, whether it be black or brown, but also be a chief to this entire city. A chief who understands Centron, understands the police review board, and look through the lenses of partnering with our city residents as well as the men and women who wear the uniform to protect us. And so I would be, if elected, the mayor, work alongside that police chief and everyone in the force to ensure that that is happening. But we must change the culture of our department.
Mr. Perez, you have 1 minute.
Protect and serve. Protect and serve is what a police department does. And a chief has to do that. In this case of Hartford, there has to be a systemic change in the way the police looks at the community and the way the community looks at the police. And you begin with the young people of our city. Currently, we treat them as if they were criminals rather than citizens. And we don't understand that the challenges that are provided to these children in our city are manifested, and they interact more with the police department than they do sometimes with their own parents. So a police chief that understands the dynamic of our city will be very successful.
Mr. Stallings, you have 1 minute.
Like I said before, I would implement a commissioner to focus on policy, community relations, and deal with political relationships with the mayor and city council. The chief would work on internal structures of the police department. When you have stressed out officers and officers that are high-strung, they tend to do things that normally they wouldn't do. My first interaction with the police was getting a beating in Keeney Park. And so police relationships in the inner city is vital. It's cultural. You need cultural competency with officers. You need a diverse police staff. But more importantly, you need the community to support police also. My oldest son is a recruit right now. And morale is so low inside the police department, they're telling my son, get certified and leave. So you have to manage morale of the police. It's a hard job. It's a demanding job.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
it's unforgiving.
Stallings. Mr. Byrne, I'll give you 1 minute to rebut.
Just add a couple of things. One, to that point about what community policing really means, I think you need to have a chief that personally embodies that, right? That's willing to go out and have any conversation, any meeting, in any room, no matter how tough the conversation. My own personal style, for better or worse, is to welcome the toughest conversations and to go into the toughest rooms. And I want a chief who's willing to do that too, because I think that's how you hear things firsthand. That's how you learn and how you can, feed that down. The other thing is I want a chief that's committed to continuing the work that we've been trying to do to build a more diverse force. We have, as we've done a lot of recruiting, we have worked hard on trying to recruit a more diverse police force. The class that's currently in the academy is actually 80% African American and Latino. I don't think we've ever had a class as diverse. It takes many classes like that over the years, but I think that it's an important commitment to make sure that our police force continues to better reflect the diversity of our city.
Thank you, Mr. Bronin. Mr. Lewis, what is your plan to add more officers to HPD? And what's a good number that you think is good for staffing in terms of officers?
I mean, when you talk about the exact number, sometimes it's difficult to say because, it's supply and demand. It depends on what the needs of the community actually are. I would say somewhere in the range of 400 to 500 police would be a decent amount of police for a city our size. And so in terms of adding more police to the actual police force, I want to incentivize them, to want, it's difficult work, it's very tough work. I want to incentivize them to actually want to become a part of the police force by offering them tremendous packages as well as the opportunity to live in a Hartford that they want to live in. We have to create an entire neighborhood in all of our neighborhoods that they can choose one and say, well, I want to live in this neighborhood and literally live in the community that they police every single day. So that would be one of my major objectives, to create the Hartford that all of our police want to live in so they won't have to go elsewhere.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. McCauley, how many officers and how would you get it done?
Repeat the question.
What is your plan to add more officers to HPD, and what do you think is a good number for officer staffing?
I think that what I've been told is anywhere from 480 to 520 in terms of police officers if you want to have community policing. And I would strongly advocate for an ongoing police academy because of the attrition rate. And so that we are, we have people in the pipeline. It takes about a year or two to adequately get police officers that are ready to actually go out in the field. So between the retirement, people just leaving, and out sick, we need to have a year-round academy.
Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute.
Maybe a minute and 15. Take the rest of his.
I can see the
No trading.
About 450. And one of the things that I would do, and I believe that the police department is doing it now, and I really commend them, is creating opportunities for young people to really see firsthand that the job is actually not a bad job, and these people are not really bad people, right? So we have to create some opportunities for there to be interest and for residents to be policemen and women and live right here in our city. One of the things that I did just recently this last session was pass a piece of legislation that would incentivize teachers to live in particular communities simultaneously addressing blighted property. We could do the same with our policemen and women so that they too could live in our communities.
Mr. Perez, you have 1 minute.
Determining the number of police officers is an annual process. You can't set a benchmark. You could have 1,000 cops in Hartford and you still would have crime. The key to having the right number and how to manage that number is having a competent police chief that understands how to deploy each and every resource that's given to him. That's why you sit down with the police department, the police chief, and he gives you his or her plan, and then you evaluate the plan, and then you determine what our city could afford. We're never going to have enough cops. The only way to deal with crime is to improve the economics of the city and reduce the number of people that are involved in legal activity.
Mr. Stallings.
Thank you. Again, I think about 400 officers is a good level. I would intentionally look at the culture of the police department in and of itself, and I would change certain institutional racist practices, such as, again, I explained my son is a recruit right now, and I'm not approximate in the numbers, but say, for example, a Hartford resident applying for the police department makes about $49,000 a year. Someone coming from outside the city, someone laterally transferring outside the city is going to make $52,000. So right there, that is inherent discrimination against a population that's black and brown. So how are you going to recruit officers, or how are you going to entice young people to want to join the police department if there's a disparity in pay scale? Other than that, I think, again, it's important to make sure that you incentivize officers, that they have a strong relationship with the community, and you kill the old boy network.
Mr. Bronin, you have 1 minute.
So I just have that piece, I mean, respectfully, is not true. There is no differential in pay based on where somebody lives. Look, we have done exactly what Stan described, which is to run a year-round academy, right? Over the last few years, we have recruited throughout the year because Hartford failed to recruit for many, many years, and we had a lot of officers that were hired in the late 1990s, so you had a whole bunch of officers reaching retirement age right about the same time between 2017 and 2019. When I first was elected, I sat down with then Chief Ravella, and he said, look, here's where we are. We're going to drop far, and we can't recruit fast enough, because you can't recruit 100 officers at a time. You need to train, you need to absorb, you need to deploy them with training before they're fully out there on their own. So we have recruited over 100 officers, and we have a plan to continue to recruiting, and we're budgeting for a number about 470. There's no specific number you can say this is the right number, but I think 400 is too low. There was an independent study that said 583. We're aiming for about 470, and in the meantime, we've got room to continue growing, and we're going to continue recruiting.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Lewis, you have 1 minute to rebut.
I mean, one of my best friends is the sheriff of Wayne County, and I hung out with him for a day, and man, that's some hard work. And all I could say is that we need to pay them a whole lot better than they're getting paid, and they need to have a better retirement package that presently is not in place. Every single position in society should be with merit and honor. But then when we look at the police and what they do and the work that they go through to keep communities safe, it's such a difficult job that we have to collectively as a community decide that they may be worth quite a bit more than what we're paying them, because it's not just hard work, but it's work where they're putting themselves in the line of fire. So we really have to review a completely different compensation package for them.
Thank you. Mr. McCauley, our next question is, would Hartford have been better off filing for bankruptcy?
I'm not a financial expert, but the people I talked to said yes.
That's your answer.
That is my answer.
Mr. McGee, would Hartford have been better off filing for bankruptcy?
No. And I think you're going to say something?
No.
Oh.
It's all yours. 1
I
minute.
believe that the direction that the Hartford delegation, we all took, and really lobbying each and every one of our colleagues to help the city of Hartford was well worth the fight. Filing for bankruptcy is a little bit different if you were to file for bankruptcy for your own private home. We're talking about a city, you can take a look at Detroit and other places where they did that and they were in shambles. And so I think we did the best thing that we were supposed to do, in that lobby our then Governor Dan Malloy and all of the colleagues at the state legislature to secure the funding to help assist Hartford.
Mr. Perez, you have 1 minute.
I think we should have begun with, I didn't have all the facts, and obviously it's hard to second guess, but I would not consider the option of bankruptcy. I thought there were other options that we could have taken. I think the state bailout and the oversight board puts Hartford residents in a very difficult position. It could be a 10-year situation. Nobody's come up with a plan to get us out of the state takeover. So when I get elected mayor, the first thing I'm going to do is work hard to figure out how to get out a state takeover and have Hartford residents control its own destiny.
Mr. Stallings.
Yes, I think we should have filed for bankruptcy, one, because the state should give us all of our pilot money, and we should be fighting for 100% of our pilot money since all of our residents pay taxes. If you're a homeowner, you're going to pay taxes, you want that money back. So yes, we should have done that. I think it would have forced the city to restructure City Hall and all of the departments. It would have forced the city to look at spending, because the year that the city was contemplating and preparing for bankruptcy, we actually spent more money in that fiscal year. And so I know I don't sound like a true Democrat. The older I get, the more conservative I get fiscally. And I just feel that we spend money redundantly instead of making sure that we are more efficient in how we spend our money. And so I think bankruptcy and that structure would have forced us to make wise decisions and stop throwing bad money at the good.
Mr. Bronin.
So I think it's important to start by just saying we were bankrupt, right? We were not legally bankrupt, but we were financially bankrupt. And what I tried to do was lay out the paths available to us. And, there were really three paths. One was to file for bankruptcy, recognizing that we had obligations that were far beyond what we could meet. The second was to build a partnership unlike we had ever had, at least in recent memory, with our companies, with labor, with the state in a big way. And the third was to keep faking it and kick it down the road for another year, or ask the state to throw in some money this year so that we could have the same conversation about crisis next year. And from my perspective, what was absolutely clear is that the third option was the worst, because you cannot grow a city when it's under permanent crisis. The key was to set a path for the long term. And I think what we ended up achieving was the best way to move us quickly to a place where we could lay a foundation and begin to grow and build.
Thank you, Mr. Bronin. Mr. Lewis.
To be quite honest with you, when you talk about the complexity of bankruptcy, it wouldn't be intelligent for me to try to answer that question without looking at the numbers. I mean, Mr. Bronin saw the numbers, and the numbers that we see in the newspaper are not the numbers that he has access to. So I can't have an educated opinion about that, because I don't know, because there are some times where bankruptcy is the absolute best option, and then there are other times where bankruptcy will actually send you into a worse situation. So honestly, I'd have to say that it all depends on what the numbers look like, and that's information that Mr. Bronin had access to and I didn't, so I don't feel adequate to really speak to that particular question.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. McCauley, you have 1 minute to rebut if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm not going to be a backseat driver. The mayor has the access to the information. I'm not going to second guess, because I don't know. But the people I've talked to say that bankruptcy would have been the best option. What has happened is the city has been put into financial receivership for the next 20 years. $50 million a year, anything over $100,000, it needs to go before the financial, the municipal oversight review board. And, the city council and the mayor are all, they almost like, perfunctory. Everything has to go before this board. And so, like Mayor Perez said, what I would do is work diligently to make sure that, we find a way to get out from underneath that financial burden and to redo the fiscal structure that keeps us perpetually in debt.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Our next question, and we'll begin with Mr. McGee here. And you've all studied the city budget because you're all running for mayor, so I assume you've all studied it. When we look at the city budget, what kind of waste, specific examples, do you see that you would try to get rid of if elected mayor? You have 1 minute.
One of the things that I would take a look at is we have, I think, a couple HR departments within the city. Let's take a look there. I would also take a look at our Board of Education. I would take a look at other areas with the experts that would help me to comb through the budget. I don't proclaim or profess to be this expert in every area. So I would ask all of my department heads to submit a budget so that we could really figure out how are we working efficiently, effectively, and keeping our residents in mind. So just to cut DPH, for example, or DPW, for example, just to say we want to close our budget is not something that I would do. And I would really comb through and figure out how can we put forth a budget that would work in tandem with our city council and in the best interest of our residents.
Mr. Perez, what specifically in the budget is currently wasteful in your judgment?
I think the biggest area, not only on the financial side, but more on a efficiency side and being more effective, is to really look at collapsing a lot of opportunities between the Board of Education and the city. We have two administrations. We're paying for financial management. We're paying for insurance. There are a lot of areas, and having a mayor that's truly engaged in, with the superintendent and with the Board of Education and the council, having one city, one voice would begin to do that. But we can't forget that if we concentrate on doing everything inside of Hartford, that we got to get full payment of pilot and full payment of ECS. If we get those resources, we better have a good budget in order to serve the needs of our city.
Thank you. Mr. Stallings.
Thank you. I would continue, I would close and consolidate 10 more schools, mitigate that money, reinvest in the school system. The central office staff is almost bare bones, so I would restructure that because most people are doing 2 to 3 jobs there. Then I would cut out maybe 2 assistant chiefs from the chief complex, remitigate that money, restructure the Department of Children and Family, and DPW. I think there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of spending waste. Right now we have Murphy Security Guard in City Hall when we're paying cadets at the same time, and if they're supposed to be learning the police job, they can serve and protect City Hall at night. So what we need to do is make sure that we're more efficient in how we're spending our money and making sure that what we are doing is achieving optimal organizational structures and systems. So that's reorganizing the system, cutting DPW, cutting chief complex, and taking that money and investing it in seniors and youth.
Mr. Bronin, you have 1 minute.
We had to make some really deep and tough cuts, and I wouldn't describe much of what we did as cutting out waste. I think we cut things that we needed. We cut into muscle and bone, and it was not choices that any mayor would want to make, and I think it's important to say that. I do think there are places where we can continue to find ways to reduce costs. If you look, I would not call this waste, but it's important to note that if you look at our school system, one of the areas where we spend a lot more money than a lot of districts is on sending kids out of district for special education services, because we haven't historically invested in building that capacity inside. That is something that the superintendent and the school board and Hartford Public Schools are working on building right now. But that's a really important way that I think we can both deliver better service to our kids and save money. Another thing is we are in the late 20th century at best when it comes to technology. We haven't been in a position to make the kind of investments in technology that makes us more customer friendly, responsive, and efficient, but that's one of the things I hope to continue doing in the years ahead.
Mr. Lewis.
One of the greatest areas of waste at the city is defending lawsuits that they need to settle on. Hypothetically, if I sue the city for $20,000 because I fell down and broke my head, you'll have, the city actually paying $500,000 to defend the lawsuit. It doesn't make sense financially. Pay the $20,000 and save the city $480,000. There are exorbitant millions of dollars of defense spending on the side of the city. That's a complete waste of money. I would also go to the Board of Education and boldly revamp the entire HR department. Most of them would have to go because that's a complete and total waste of money. It's a waste of our spending. Most of them don't know what they're doing, and they're overpaid, and they underproduce. The superintendent would have to go immediately because she's making $262,000 a year, and our children are underperforming. By anybody's standards, that makes absolutely no sense.
Mr. McCauley, you have 1 minute.
It would be nice to get our money's worth from every department that is in service to the citizens of the city. But at some point, you can't cut anymore. What else are we going to cut? We need more revenue. There's nothing left to cut. Not that's going to be significant in bringing money, real revenue. We the anecdotal cuts, but we need to first get every dime that we should be getting in terms of payment in lieu of taxes. Hartford has a special issue. We know that we are structurally deficient. Make a special exemption for Hartford to get 100% of our pilot. And then we need to truly work on economic development, because you can't keep cutting, and you keep cutting anymore, the system will collapse.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute to rebut.
Sure. As a state representative and have done work on a lot of the pilot that so many of these gentlemen have been talking about, it's been about 30 plus years that a particular municipality has received 100% of its pilot dollars. So just to let you know. So Hartford is not on its own when it comes to reimbursement of pilot dollars. But just, we need to begin thinking outside of the box. And one of the things that I'd like to do under the McGee administration is looking into creating an office that will create opportunities for strategic development, innovation, so that we can get out of our own way and create opportunities for this city to grow. And again, so many great opportunities.
Mr. President, this next question goes to you. There are reports from some people in the West End. They are having difficulty reaching city agencies, from unanswered phones to unanswered messages, for the help that they need. What steps would you make to improve the responsiveness of City Hall?
I was proud that I worked hard with the West End. We had a $25 million rehab and expansion of Webster School, which was a priority. And we established a 311 system specifically to make sure that we were able to track the efficiency of departments when residents come in. So what I would do is make sure that the 311 system is working and that department heads are being held accountable. We used to have the equivalent of a stat meeting that police use to make sure that citizens' complaints are being addressed. The excuse that we don't have enough staff, that it's somebody else's department, could be tracked with technology, and we hold each department accountable for customer service.
Mr. Stallings, you have 1 minute.
Change the medium in which City Hall fields calls and things from constituencies. So, for example, reorganize 311, but then at the same time, you need to have presence on social media. So I would have not necessarily someone trolling Facebook all day, but simply someone either directly in my office and 311 monitoring the Facebook page, the city web social pages, so that we can respond immediately, and then create a strong communication network from every department head to the mayor's office to 311, so those messages can be expedited to the proper department. We are in desperate need of efficiency in the city all over.
Mr. Bronin, you have 1 minute.
So the first thing is, and I mean this seriously, tell me, because I want to talk to my department heads or anyone who's not responsive. It's really important to me that our team gets back to people. We have, when it comes to 311, not only staffed it, but created a physical presence so that we constantly have our 311 representatives in City Hall on the ground floor. You can go up and talk to them face to face. The 311 system, I hope everyone uses it because it's the best way to document a concern or a complaint so that I can hold my team accountable, and we all can. And I'd say my email is luke.bronin@hartford.gov. Please don't hesitate to send me an email, and I really mean that. But to me, it's about setting the cultural expectation from the top of responsiveness. I try to do that. Where we fall short, I want to know.
Mr. Lewis.
Personally, I've never myself had to call the number, and so I have not had a personal problem with it myself. However, if that particular system is not working, I just have to put a new system in place and hold accountable whoever is supposed to be doing the work to just make sure that they're doing the job that they're being paid for.
Mr. McCauley.
I agree. I mean, I'm old school. You call somebody and they call you back. This is just a matter of holding people accountable. I mean, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel here. We need to hold people accountable for doing their job. If you call the city and you don't get a response, then there should be a place that you can call up the chain all the way up to the mayor's office. I can guarantee you, if you call me as mayor, because you don't get to someone, I'll give you my cell phone and we will walk to that office while I am on the phone, and they can explain to me and you why they have a problem getting back to you. It is unacceptable. I return calls every day up to 2 a.m. So I'm here to tell you that is a pet peeve of mine. You will hear from someone. Trust me.
Mr. McGee.
I'm definitely not going to be up at 2 a.m., but you better believe it will be an open door policy where each and every one of the residents in this city will have access to the mayor's office. But let's take a step outside of 311. I think that is extremely important so that you can track, assess, evaluate, and you go in that circle so that you can improve the process. But with technology and organizations in this city that could provide so many platforms, we literally have organizations developing mechanisms that we use. Y'all familiar with Instagram? You're familiar with Facebook and Snapchat? It all works. LinkedIn and other social media platforms that allow for all of us to communicate. And I think we as a city need to embrace many of these social media platforms and communication mechanisms that would allow for us to be together. And good old-fashioned, let's town hall, let's talk, and
Thank you,
really
Mr. McGee.
dive deeper. I still had a second leg.
Mr. Perez, you have 1 minute to rebut.
Best way for the West End to get the cost return is change administrations. Change administration. The current administration has hired a lot of people that don't know our city. You have to explain to them which street we're talking about, and you got to explain which garbage can they forgot to pick up yesterday. That's what they do. My administration was very, very focused on quality of life, picking up the garbage, filling the potholes, and making sure. That's why we created 311, because we needed a new system. It's the administration folks. It's not the folks who answer the phones. The mayor is responsible. He should be answering the 311 calls himself if he can't find other people to do it.
Mr. Stallings, you get the next question. And you pretty much are all in agreement that there's not too much more that can be cut out of the city budget. You all talk about revenue. What is your specific idea to bring more revenue to the city of Hartford? If you look around to the neighboring suburbs, they're building new restaurants, there's lines to open in an empty building, there's stores coming. What would you do for the city of Hartford to bring revenue to our city? Mr. Stallings, you can begin here.
Wow. I would take advantage of some of the things that we have in the city. So, for example, sports entertainment is something that people are excited about and something that defines our city. So I would not only emphasize and promote the soccer team and the baseball team, but regional intramural sports.
And how would that make money?
No, amateur sports again, amateur sports is extremely expensive. For example, I have a son that plays AAU right now. It's about $800 per child. So that is something that we can do. What we need to do also is create more family entertainment opportunities because there's no place for our residents to bring our families to eat. But more importantly, we need investment, venture capitalist investment banking to develop business, technological businesses and green businesses in the meadows and throughout the city.
Mr. Bronin, you have 1 minute.
So I think there's only one way, other than getting more state funding, there's only one way you get more revenue to the city of Hartford, and it's to grow the tax base, grow property taxes. That's the only real source of local revenue. So we need to promote development as much as we possibly can, and that's why we need to celebrate development in every neighborhood. You know, if we can get Westbrook Village and Bowles Park rebuilt to modern, high-quality, affordable housing, that creates housing, and it also lifts up our grand list. If we can get the Colt building back on the grand list, that revitalizes that neighborhood, but it also creates economic development. And if we can get companies to take office space in our downtown buildings, which are a huge portion of our tax base, that allows us to generate the revenue to maintain the services that our community needs. So we have to push forward on every economic development front. That's why the work of trying to build an innovation ecosystem here where our insurance companies and advanced manufacturers and medical field are bringing startups to this city where they can take root and grow. It helps us because we've got to
Thank you,
get
Mr.
people
Bronin.
filling buildings to pay
Thank
the
you.
taxes.
Mr. Lewis, you have 1 minute.
I believe that we are overtaxed, and so I believe we pay far too much taxes. I was in Florida.
But the question is about revenue. What kind of revenue would you
I
bring
was
in?
in Florida a week ago, and the way that they deal with taxes is through tourism. And I really believe that we need to pass that on to people that come through after we have created a place for people to want to come. The Connecticut River is tremendous. It needs to be developed. There needs to be businesses down at the Connecticut River. There needs to be so many different things for children and families to do on an every single day basis. And that's where I believe that new tax dollars should come from people that are coming through to enjoy our wonderful historic city. But in terms of continually taxing the people, particularly residents, they are taxed out. I believe that beyond a shadow of a doubt that, you tax them anymore and they're just going to pop.
Mr. McCauley, you have 1 minute.
Let the clock run. Repeat the question.
What kind of ideas would you have to bring new revenue to the city in terms of getting new businesses to come here? What specific ideas do you have?
There's only one way for the city to make money, and that's through taxes. And we're not talking about employment ideas and ways to recreate economy so that we can take Hartford from being a city that is in distress and putting money in the pockets of people. We're talking about revenue to the city. And so if we don't build our grand list and find ways to increase value for the city so that it can tax, there is no other way to bring money in. I mean, we can do fees through tourism, arts, entertainment, which I'm a huge fan of and have a plan for. But all the arts, entertainment, and tourism isn't going to close the gap that we need in terms of revenue. So, we have to continue to grow Hartford, make it a destination that people want to come to so that we can build our grand list.
Thank you. Mr. McGee.
What I won't do is tax the residents in the city of Hartford, starting with our property taxes. I'll get to the revenue question. I won't reassess your property at a higher value so that I can close the deficit. That's what I won't do, okay? But when you begin to talk about taxes, you begin to talk about, revenue, I'll serve as a champion and work alongside our development department and those individuals that could help us to identify businesses and startup companies that we have right in here in our city to help them to grow so that more people, not just in the West End, but throughout this entire city, can spend more money within our local economy. But when you begin talking about raising prices on permits and taxing you just to raise revenue, it's not the way to go.
Mr. Perez, you have 1 minute.
I want to thank Mayor Ronan for acknowledging the work of the Peters administration, the Perez administration, and the Segarra administration. All the projects he mentioned were planned by other administrations. He's just been cutting ribbons.
Please hold off your applause, please.
So the biggest way to raise revenue for the city is to invest in Hartford's neighborhoods. If we take one third of what we invest in downtown and invested it in the 17 neighborhoods, we could grow the grand list there just as fast as we're doing in downtown.
Mr. Stallings, you have 1 minute to rebut.
Thank you. When I talked about venture capitalism and investment banking, I was talking about growing the grand list because that's the only way that you're going to get capital, startup capital, or investment capital to do that. So when I talked about in sports entertainment, I was talking about and referring to tourism. It's about making sure that people are excited to come to Hartford. We have no vibrant nightlife. We have no vibrant life or identity at all. And so I agree that we need to expand the grand list, but how we do that and how we expand the city and allow residents to keep their dignity without gentrifying residents, without gentrifying taking care of the poor is what's important. And expanding and revitalizing our neighborhoods are important. We need homeowners. And in order to get that done, we need a strong economy. We need people to have jobs. We need skilled labor downtown. All those things are what we need all those are the ingredients to build a strong economy and generate revenue.
Our next question goes to Mr. Bronin first. If WECA were holding this forum 4 years from now, and we were looking back on your accomplishments over the past 4 years as mayor, what would you report to us? So let's go ahead. 4 years in the future, and you're talking about the 4 years to come.
So I hope a couple of things. One, I hope that I'd be able to report that the fiscal stability that we fought so hard to get is still there, that we built a solid foundation, and that, you know, whether I'm running again 4 years from now or passing the baton to someone else, that we're on solid ground, because everything else depends on that. Then I'd hope that we'd made progress at filling in those gaps on economic development. That's how we create both a more sustainable city and a more vibrant city, is to take those lots like the one you mentioned, across from the Capitol, or, those vacant lots like at Woodland and Albany, or any number of other places, and knit our neighborhoods back together by promoting economic development. And the third is that I hope we got better at dealing with the core quality of life issues. I think on some we've done well, and on some we've got a lot of work to do. And that matters a lot to me. Small things matter, and so I hope I'd be able to report that we've made a lot of progress on that too.
Mr. Lewis.
One of the things I'd love to look back and be able to say is that our entire educational system has been revamped, that we have compassionate leadership that cares about the children more than they do their salary, that we have a system that celebrates teachers instead of testing the teachers and over testing the students. The pressure that's on teachers is absolutely ridiculous. And I really would like to create a culture and environment where teachers are appreciated, celebrated, and they can do their job of teaching. I'd like to create a community where every single person in this city goes to every part of this city and they feel safe. And that we're no longer marginalizing this area or that area, or saying, well, this area of town is not safe to go in, I wouldn't go over. I want every single area to be an exchange so that people can draw from the cultures of each of the cities. And with that, each neighborhood should have an initiative, and will have an initiative of growing businesses that are thriving in each and every single neighborhood of the city.
Mr. McCauley.
I would like to see, 4 years after my administration is in, a community that is actively engaged in their government. They are actively engaged in their NRZs. They're actively engaged with their town committees, irrespective of what party they are in. That we have a city that is working outside of the silos and able to communicate with one another. That we have schools that are moving forward, and that we have children that actually graduate and being able to read at way above a third grade education. And that the streets are actually safe enough that people feel safe to walk through Keeney Park at midnight, and that they feel engaged with their neighbors, and that we have economic development that moves the city forward and makes us one of the top 10 small cities in the country. That's what I would like to see.
Mr. McGee.
4 years looking back, I'd like to stand before you all and say, look, we've addressed our homeless population by placing tiny homes right there at South Green. I'd like to report back to you all that, those returning home, they have an opportunity to live, work, and play in this neighborhood and be a part of the fabric. I'd like to report back that the high school dropout rate has actually gone down because we've addressed the education system. And lastly, or maybe second to last, change the culture of City Hall, but also making sure that our entire city is working together, and we're not saying, oh, West End, you all think you're better than this end, but we're all appreciating every single asset that we have in this city.
Mr. Perez.
4 years from now, I love to have a headline in the New York Times that says, Hartford, the comeback city with the comeback mayor. And the measurement of that would be that we no longer have to apologize for our school system to each parent in our district, to each parent. That we no longer have to run into potholes every time you turn the corner. That we no longer have a police department that doesn't have transparency and makes stumbles each and every week under another problem. That we no longer have neighborhoods that are competing with each other because we have one large neighborhood plan that's moving the city forward with wealth creation in each neighborhood, supporting our small businesses, supporting our home ownerships, and making sure that the problems we had are being dealt with.
Mr. Stallings.
Thank you. 4 years from now, I would like to look back and talk about and see and show evidence of a multicultural, multifaceted city that is universal, has a universal approach on quality of life, where residents are learning from one another, and that we build strong community, that we have a strong 18-member governance team. Every elected member or appointed member that's a member of governance have a strong platform and agenda that is tied to Central Hall, but also represents our city, that we have a strong school system that's culturally competent, that not only is going to emphasize math and science, but look at cultural history, the African diaspora, the Caribbean, and more inclusive of the ethnic groups that are here in Hartford. I would like a city that has a vibrant and strong local economy so that we can pay our bills and so that we can employ our own young people. And my time's up, so I'll respect the time. Thank you.
Mr. Bronin, you have 1 minute to rebut.
I think beyond what I said before, it would be a city that knows where it's headed. We're 16 years away from our 400th anniversary, when Hartford turns 400. We're about to begin the planning process. We've already been doing some resident surveys on what residents want to see, but I hope that 4 years from now we also have just a strong sense of direction, that this is where we, both neighborhoods individually, cultural institutions individually, and we as a city collectively have laid out our vision, say this is where we want to be. Then 12 years from now, when we turn 400, because the truth is the work of building a city is always the work of decades. It is year after year building a stronger foundation, and hopefully at that point a clear consensus as a city about where we're headed.
Thank you, Mr. Bronin. Mr. Lewis, our next question. If you don't win the Democratic primary, will you support the winner or run as an independent?
Who said I wasn't going to win?
If you don't.
Well, before I get to that bridge, I can't necessarily answer that question because it depends on which of the candidates actually aligns with my value system. And so that's really the truth of the matter, because if someone aligns with the values that I believe in, then I'm going to support that person. But I will say that whoever becomes mayor, I'm going to wholeheartedly support the office of the mayor, because even if it's someone that I may not necessarily care for their style of leadership, this is my city, and I want to see my city prosper. And so for me to get behind the next mayor will be a smart move, particularly if it's me.
Mr. McCauley.
Well, my path to victory does not include a victory in the primary because I'm not in it. So I will look forward with bated breath to see who my contestant is, because I am eager to find out who wins the Democratic primary. So since I am supporting myself, I will not be supporting my dear lovely brethren up here, who I know very, very well, all of them. But I will say this: should I not be blessed with the opportunity to serve my fellow constituents, I will be a servant to whoever becomes the mayor, because I believe that servitude is, the key to leadership. If you can't be a leader if you're not willing to be a servant. So whoever wins, I'm here to help them.
Mr. McGee.
What was your question again?
Will you support the winner of the Democratic primary, or will you run as an independent if you were to lose?
I'm in this to win it, and I plan on going to the end. So I plan on winning the primary with the help of these people, but should there be one who wins the top primary, I plan to support that person.
Mr. Perez.
I don't know yet. Hartford's a funny town. You turn around and you say something, and you have to say, I didn't mean that, I meant something else. So I've learned that if you're not sure what you're going to do, you admit it right away. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm waiting with bated breath to see what the party does first, and then I'll react to what they do.
Thank you. Mr. Stallings, you have 1 minute.
I would actually echo that answer. I don't know. I'm a true believer, so there's absolutely no ego to this. I'm a team player. Can I support someone? Yes. Can I support a person who's working towards the same goals that I'm working towards? Yes, I can. However, that would be a long and lengthy, rocky conversation behind the scenes. I would like to see a citywide or regional spelling bee. I would like to see a science contest or some kind of innovative entrepreneurial contest, and those are projects that I want to work on desperately. So that would be my price for support. But we need work.
Mr. Bronin.
I certainly hope to support the Democratic nominee and hope to be the Democratic nominee. I think Aaron said it well. If I were not to win that primary, then it would be important to me that whoever did, I have confidence in them as a leader. The future of this city is important to me, so we would cross that bridge when we came to it. But my goal is to win this primary. I'm a strong and proud Democrat.
All right, we're down to our final statements, closing arguments, if you will. And Mr. McCauley, you get to go first this time.
Okay.
You have 1 minute.
McCauleyformayor.com. I encourage you all to go and look at it. Look at the 11 questions that the Hartford Courant has put out. Take the time to read them. There are 66 questions. It is my never to be humble opinion that you all are living on a political plantation. And it is time to free your political mind. And you can only do that if you're willing to think like an independent thinker. This is not about party. It's not about me. It's not about them. It's not about the mayor, who has a very difficult job. It's about you. This is your town. It's your city. And I have to encourage you to vote your conscience, but do your homework. You being here right now is proof that you're willing to do that.
Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to come and to share with you my platform, what it is that I'd like to see with respect to the vision for this city. I do not want to see or hear another mother cry about the loss of their child. I don't want to hear another situation when you talk about young children not having the opportunity to attend a school of their choice right across the street from their homes. I don't want to hear from another business owner that's saying, look, dude, I just want to run my business and not go through the red tape. I want to work alongside every single person in this room, whether you're from the West End, South End, Hartford's North End, wherever. We have to move Hartford in a direction where we're all moving together. Please vote for me. I ask for your support. Thank you so much.
Mr. Perez, you have 1 minute.
Hartford, I ask you for another opportunity. This has always been a city of hope and opportunity. It's been like that to myself for the last 50 years. It's been like that for my wife. It's been like that for my son and daughter. And it will continue to be like that for my 3 grandchildren. I know I could serve Hartford once again. I ask for the opportunity to make sure that the school system is working again. I ask for the opportunity to take us away from state control and to self-government that we enjoyed 4 years ago when we were working hard to make Hartford the great city. I asked you to give me a chance, and I won't fail you. I work hard for the city of Hartford. Perez for Hartford.
Mr. Stallings, you have 1 minute, please.
Nothing in this world is constant but change. Nothing. Everything is constantly changing. And we need to embrace change in the city of Hartford. We need to work together to do so. We need to trust one another. We need to build relationships. And more importantly, we need to build a sense of community again. We can't do that isolated. We need to work together. As you heard, I'm a dedicated worker. I worked about 80 hours as chairman of the board. That's the kind of leadership you need at city council. That's the kind of leadership you need in the mayor's office. That's the kind of leadership you need in any elected official. 80 hours is full time. Anything less, you're not doing your job. We need leadership. We need strong leadership. We need decisive change. Excuse me, not divisive. Decisive change. We need to stop being divided. We all want the same things. We want quality education. We want our kids to stop chasing wishes and follow their dreams. In order to do that, we need to work together. We need to trust one another. My name is Craig Stones, running for mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Bronin, you have 1 minute.
First of all, I want to say thank you again to everybody for coming out tonight, and thank you to WICA for organizing. Dennis, thank you for moderating. I hope that what you've seen over the last 4 years is that I've worked my heart out. I have given everything I can to moving this city forward. And you probably don't agree with everything that I've done, because I don't agree with everything I've done. There are things I do differently. But I think we've come from one of our most difficult periods as a city to a place where we are moving step by step in the right direction. I don't think it's the time to change course. I don't think it's the time to slow down. I don't think it's the time to go back. I love the work that we're doing. I believe in this city. I hope to have the chance to keep working my heart out for the next 4 years, and I'd be grateful for the opportunity. So I ask for your vote. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Bronin. Mr. Lewis, you have 1 minute.
Yes, I am definitely convinced that our city needs to change, our educational system needs to change, and we need to have quantitative measures to determine that. It's not just saying that the schools are doing well, but yet the actual scores are being manipulated and they're not actually true. We need to bring our city together. We need foreign languages to lead in our school. We have children from all over the world in Hartford, and yet we don't concentrate on foreign languages in the school system. That's something that's tremendously needed. We need to support our teachers, and we need to create a system of safety throughout all of our communities, and we need to really start supporting businesses. I do it by example. I shop Hartford because I love Hartford, and I really believe that we can create a new community where no one's left out and everybody really gets along despite what we look like.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I'd like to thank the West End Civic Association for hosting this event tonight. Thanks to Kurt and Suzanne for inviting me. Hold on 1 second. Kurt and Suzanne for inviting me to do this. Thank you very much. I want to thank our candidates, Craig Stallings, Eddie Perez, Brendan McGee, Stan McCauley, Aaron Lewis, and Luke Bronin. And now you can applause for the candidates. Thank you so much for your time tonight. And don't forget to vote.